First question. What are some of your tips on creating your preferred partner network when you're just getting started?
Partner network is a great topic to discuss because that can be one of the foundation pieces in trying to establish your business. Here, there's primarily two ways to approach the real estate business, and a combination of both is suggested. One of the approaches is, where do I get my prospects potentially to work with? And there are all types of services, both paid and unpaid services, that can generate potential leads for you to work with. And obviously, following up and converting on those leads is all part of our business. So the key thing for us, I think, is to try to have a mix of that, plus working on our personal referral base. One of the personal referral networks that is very achievable and can be very fruitful for both sets of individuals is the network that you will potentially establish as you become more experienced in the business and work with more vendors. A past question from one of the past shows of who is a good candidate for that. Many of the individuals that are involved in the day-to-day professional aspects of the business, which you are potentially working with, individuals such as attorneys that would assist you and handle closings on behalf of your clients on a recommendation basis. They may also have clients from time to time that are going to need real estate services. So working with an experienced attorney is really something that is a key to being part of your network. In addition to that, insurance connection. Pretty much every individual that's going to come in to a buying situation is going to need a connection on the insurance side. That would be either homeowner's insurance or a condominium insurance, or even a renter's insurance policy. So having an insurance connection is important, and that's a good one from the network side. Accounting is also another one of the aspects on the professional side that you may be involved with. And then the lender contacts can't be understated. Oftentimes, as you are meeting your first-time buyers that are coming in, or even second-time buyers, they may not have a good referral source for lending. So if you can provide that with them, you're going to be giving them not only a great service, but hopefully putting them in a position that they can get the job done efficiently and economically, and that it's a good financial scenario for your client. So all of those professional sources are really good networking opportunities for you as an experienced or as a brand new real estate agent in trying to build that base. The other sector of the marketplace is likely the individuals that would be doing some work connected to the real estate transaction itself. That would be physical work. It could be plumbers, painters, electricians, carpenters, general contractors, and a variety of additional individuals that are involved in that process along the way. Landscapers come to mind, and many, many others that can assist you with getting the properties either ready for sale or being in a position that once individual buyers come in, they're going to need some help potentially in getting some recommendations to spruce up the property that they're going to be acquiring. And if you have a network of those individuals, it can be quite rewarding for your clients. Again, you're providing a great service for them. You're also in a position where you can get them quality workers, and hopefully they'll be in a position that they can get a lot of benefit out of your suggestions. And ultimately, some referrals can be generated from those sources too.
Great.
Excuse me.
All right, good stuff as usual.
Thanks, Gino. One of the things we always talk about in this business is you have to ride through the ups and the downs of the real estate business. And we'll make a professional reference here to the Chicago Cubs coming off a great high over the weekend with a 3-game sweep of the Cardinals, playing the last place worst record team in baseball, the Marlins last night. Put themselves in a position that they did not close out the transaction. They did not close out the deal, and ultimately wound up, unfortunately, losing a ball game. I think one of the with a quality company. Hopefully that company is going to provide you with inputs in putting that plan together. And then I would suggest, again, stay the course. Don't, if you have hit a bump in the road, like the Cubs hit a bump in the road last night, unexpectedly, of course, you're not going to win every game. That's why they play 162 games. You're not going to win every listing on it, and you're not going to be in a position that you sell every one of your properties that you list in the first week. But you have to ride it out, stay true to the game, stay true to the course, and hopefully you'll be in a position that you have more successes than challenges as your real estate career moves forward. With that aside, being completed, we'll move on to the next question.
Perfect. So, why do some companies hold earnest money and some do not?
Well, earnest money is typically a part of a transaction. It's one of the negotiable items in any transaction. And one of the questions is, do I have to have earnest money in a transaction? Earnest money these days is primarily a good faith function of the transaction itself. And that means that if the individual that's the buyer wants to advise that they are very interested in the property, they are going to then put up a deposit, the earnest money deposit, which will show that they are sincere about moving forward and completing the contract and fulfilling the contingencies. Three big contingencies: the home inspection contingency, the attorney approval contingency, which runs concurrently with the inspection contingency, and typically the third big one is the financing contingency in the transaction. So as that process is unfolding, if a buyer puts up, or when they put up earnest money, that earnest money shows that they are sincere. We're not going to get into the legality of when there are default situations on earnest money, but very, very typically, the earnest money is for the most often, unless there's an outright default in the transaction, that money is going to be refunded to the buyer along the way if there's a breakdown between the parties on inspection or attorney approval or mortgage contingency, as long as the parties have followed the terms of the contract, served appropriate notices through their attorneys, and have moved forward. So back to the earnest money question. Why do certain offices hold it? Well, traditionally, the listing office in the real estate transaction has been the one that's been responsible to hold the earnest money, and that is for the benefit of the seller, but they actually are an escrowee, so ultimately they are the middle person in the transaction, and by custom, seller's side or listing broker usually has the earnest money. It's not required. The buyer's agent office can also hold the earnest money, because remember, again, we have to split those two functions. One is the brokerage side, and then the second function, which is the escrow. Now that's holding the earnest money. Now that person is, again, an escrowee, or this is the company, is the escrowee, and they hold for the benefit of both of the parties in the transaction. Other alternatives could be having it held by a title company. The attorneys could be involved potentially in holding earnest money. For the most part, these days, because of the paperwork that's involved in holding earnest money, and because of the risks and liabilities, certain offices have opted out of doing that, and so sometimes it's a question of, well, who wants to hold the earnest money? Our office specifically, Weichert Realtors All Pro, we're a traditional office, and we do hold the earnest money on behalf of the parties in the transaction to be able to expedite the movement on it. But every office sets its own policies on that, and it's always good to check with the managing broker as to what their opinion is. And in my opinion, it's one of the services that we provide in a transaction, rather than just trying to opt out of it, as many companies do. But again, that's very important. The other thing I think that is important too is just to note that earnest money is not a requirement in a transaction. So there have been transactions that I've been involved in that have closed without earnest money. It is a very, very much a rare exception. And typically, if I'm representing a seller, there'd have to be some very overriding reason why there would not be earnest money put up in a transaction. And then ultimately, that's going to be a seller's decision if they want to move forward on a transaction without an earnest money deposit. There could be some good reasons, and those are taken usually on a case-by-case basis along the way. So again, confer with your managing broker on that. If you're listening and you're part of our company, then of course I'm available for a phone call anytime to address that more thoroughly.
Good stuff. So essentially, it's just it's another way for the company to offer value because it's another service layer on top of everything else you do.
I would agree. Yeah. Well, 99.9% of the transactions have earnest money. So someone ultimately needs to take the responsibility for that. I personally, on our side, the benefit of our office holding earnest money is that we are able to better monitor the transaction because we know, in fact, that the earnest money did come in. We also know that the earnest money was deposited. The state requires the earnest money to be promptly deposited in a separate account, in our escrow account. And ultimately, we'll know if that happens, and we'll also know if the earnest money doesn't come in on it right away, rather than if there's a third party, sometimes there's a loss of control. You don't really know if the buyers have gone out and dropped it off at the title company, if they've actually dropped it off with an attorney in the transaction. There's sometimes a loss of control and then the communication level on it. So ultimately, if we are the coordinator of the transaction on the listing side, that puts us in a little bit better position. Also, if there's an issue with the earnest money deposit being funded and also being negotiated, occasionally we do receive an earnest money check and then there's no funds behind it. So the check comes back on SF there because the individual that put up the money did not have enough money in their account. That's kind of a red flag out there, that if they don't have enough in their account for clearing the earnest money deposit, that someone should take note of that immediately, because obviously a lender is going to be tracking that money as part of the down payment money for the transaction itself. So if we hold it, we're on the front line to know what's going on in the transaction, rather being on the back burner somewhere else in the transaction. So that's my personal opinion. We like to be proactive. We like to do the best job that we can in representing our clients' interests along the way, and that's been our company position, on that over the years.
All right, so go in a different direction here. When you're working with a buyer, what are some things you would ask them during your initial needs assessment session?
Well, that's a good one. We, through our training programs here, and all of our agents know that as they go through their training through our Weichert system, that there's several sessions that are focused on working with the buyer. One of our prime brochures that we work with takes us through the process in 16 steps of first meeting with the buyer and then walking them through the entire transaction. So on day one, when you have that first buyer interview, you can walk them through the entire process in advance of actually signing a contract, so they know what to anticipate. That could be involved in this inspection process, the attorney approval, making sure that they have a pre-approval letter up front so that they can negotiate their strongest position if we happen to represent them as a buyer, knowing the things that they're going to need to do along the way to get the loan, to get their homeowner's insurance, to do all the other things that are related to the typical transaction itself, and then eventually, hopefully, to finish up, with a smooth landing and with a happy closing. So at that first session, we have a predetermined way of approaching it to make sure that we don't have a lot of loose ends. We always recommend having a face-to-face interview with our buyers so that we can get them in to the office and have an opportunity to find out if they want to work with us, and as importantly, whether we want to work with them in the pursuit of a home. We look at this as a two-way street. We have to be able to make sure that both of our common goals are going to be achieved, and not everyone is always going to be a successful scenario for whatever reason along the way, based on buyer side or listing side. Not everyone is a great match. Not everyone is a great fit, and oftentimes, we want to get that sorted out in the very early stages. Set up expectations, what the buyer can expect, how often the buyer wants to see homes, how we would handle a negotiation, and all the other particulars in the transaction itself. So if that first session is handled, you can clear the air completely, rather than just trying to be in a position where you do it on the fly and then there's a lot of gaps along the way, and it never gets off to the right start, and oftentimes a bad start is a sign of a finish line that's going to be potentially a lot further down the road than maybe both of the parties would like.
Alrighty. Let's see. So we've been getting a lot of questions around the listing presentation. So maybe it's just a good idea for you to kind of go through all the steps that you take when you're sitting down with a potential new client and take them through that process and give them that presentation.
Okay, yeah. On the listing side, that we've always said, and I've been in this business, as you know, Gino, over 35 years, and there's an old saying from the days of yore that you have to list to last in this business. And if you don't work on listings and secure listings as part of your base of business, it puts individuals in really a challenged position, because if they're exclusively working with buyers, they're not in a position always that there's going to be a flow of those buyers. From the listing side, inventory control and listings provides a certain amount of assurance that as listings are taken, you ultimately are going to have a base of business that you can work through, and ultimately each of the individuals that's there can set up their own expectations with their managing broker as to what's a great goal, what is reality, and how long is it going to take for an individual to get started and really wind up being an effective lister in the business itself. We have elaborate presentations that we set up here in our training processes to make sure that our individuals really understand each step within the listing process. In the Weichert system, it's called the DOORS listing presentation system, and it's available in multiple presentations that are there. And it's a very elaborate step-by-step approach so that individuals know what's going on before they go out, that they have a certain level of assurance through our Partner Up program. Oftentimes they're going to be working with an experienced broker, getting started in the business to assist them, not to be someone that is going to just be in the background, but someone that can be up front and center to get them rolling as they start in the business. Importance that the individual starting in this business develops confidence. As we discuss often in our meetings, there's no practice sessions in this business. It's a tough business. On it, you're always live. If you're working with someone, doesn't matter the level of the transaction to that individual. It's the most important thing that they're doing, and they deserve the highest quality level of care and attention that can be provided in the marketplace there. And our company is committed to making sure that we have that available and that we do that for those individuals. So again, getting started on the listing presentation itself, I think there's probably 3 keys to take a look at when you're looking at the listing process. When you're meeting with your seller, they're probably going to want to know 3 things, and in the order of importance, that's going to be up to you in explaining those. But ultimately, you can go from larger to smaller, or you can go from smaller to larger. By that I mean, for example, in our system, the Weichert national system is a great company and has over 500 affiliates nationwide. We have a great system that's been put together, high-end approach, great image, and that's the start of the presentation where you can talk about Weichert companies and our base on a corporate side and how that affects us. The second level is the franchisee, and that would be Weichert Realtors All Pro. Excuse me. That would be talking about your company, and that would be the twists that are involved individually with our company here, our support system, our admins, and how you individually fit as a salesperson into that system. And finally, the last thing is your own twist as a salesperson that you're going to bring into the transaction. So that's letting the seller know about your personal background, your strengths that you have, and how you separate yourself from the competition. The actual order of those things can be in any order. I think that we're really in a business now where we're very agent-centric. So individuals, again, oftentimes are going to focus on themselves, but it's always nice to know that you have a strong support system behind you, and that's why we like to highlight both the Weichert name on a national basis and also the local franchise name, Weichert Realtors All Pro, with myself as the managing broker there as part of that process. So after you've explained that to them, then we would move typically into our marketing, things that we would be doing. So why would the seller want to list with us? And there are certain reasons. In addition to working with a great agent, what are the things that would be happening during the process? What do we do to differentiate ourselves from the competition? And how do we follow through to make sure that all those things do happen in the transaction itself? So that, again, would be the marketing side of the transaction. And finally, I think it goes pretty heavily towards valuation. We would want to be talking about the valuation process, how we would be attempting to come to a price that would be a good marketing price for the property, a good list price, and how we would market to that segment of the market that would be candidates, and how we would approach all of the avenues that are out there, both on a web basis, on a MLS basis, on a local basis with the company, and all the other various things that we do to try to sell the property, including open houses and just listeds, just solds, door-to-door pass-outs, and all of the other different twists that are put. There is no one magic solution. We don't exactly know where it's going to come from. We do know that the formula, if put together properly, will oftentimes, and most of the time, yield a favorable result on it. But the pricing part of the discussion is certainly one of the important parts of the listing presentation. So kind of taking it, again, just in a review basis, it's talking about the company that you're with, talking about the national company, talking about yourself as an individual, discussing marketing options that are out there and the things that we would do from that side, looking at valuation, and then ultimately seeing if we can answer questions that the seller might have before we complete the listing agreement. I think expectations are really important too. So it's trying to set the expectations realistically with the sellers so they know what's going to be coming down the road and what they can expect in the transaction. Identifying the bumps in the road before the bump is an important factor, and experienced agents that are there can anticipate those and hopefully soften the blow on the landing on bumps. Almost every transaction that I've been involved in always has some bump in the road, and that means that something unexpected can occur. It's only unexpected if you don't plan ahead and if you don't know the contingencies that could be involved in every transaction. Then it may seem devastating when something happens. Once you've been doing it for a long, long time, then you can anticipate issues oftentimes and hopefully prepare yourself and your clients for the challenges, and then finally trying to learn how to overcome those challenges along the way, because just knowing the challenge is going to be there without figuring out a resolution and an answer is probably going to be self-defeating. So you got to know how to fix that problem, and hopefully the problem never occurs, but if it comes along the way in the transaction, whatever it is, then again, having a good team with you to answer those challenges is vital to being able to keep the train on the tracks and keep moving forward towards your closing date. We always have to remember that we are working on a timeline basis. So whether the closing time frame is 30 days or 45 days or 60 days, there are things that need to happen all the way along the line on that process in order to be able to get to the finish line in an appropriate time frame for the sellers and the buyers in the transaction. So in general, I would explain all of those things in the listing presentation so that the seller has a good idea of what's going to be coming down the line. Follow-up question to that, Gino?
Yeah, so a lot of the process, in my opinion, my experience has been that some people really want all the nitty-gritty details about everything you're going to do for them, quote unquote, everything that looks good on paper. So as far as marketing, as far as talking about the company, here's all the things that we can offer certainly expect and they know that you as an agent, as a company professional, are going to get the job done one way or another, right? So they just kind of want to get to know you. They want to know that person they're going to be going on this journey with is going to be someone they can stand beneath them. Is that fair to say?
I would agree, absolutely.
And sometimes, you're going through your presentation and they're sitting there rolling their eyes because they know everyone's got all these tools. And everybody's got, stuff that, again, looks good on paper, looks good in a pamphlet, but they want to know about the person, right? But you still need to have, in my opinion, a rock solid presentation, so you can't neglect that. So you always got to be prepared. But I think you have to kind of be light on your feet sometimes, and just kind of read the situation, read the people. Is that fair?
I would completely agree. And that's why with our company, we typically recommend a two-step approach. And our first step is when we're meeting with the seller for the first time or the buyer, but typically, let's say it's a seller example because we're talking about listings here. During that first meeting, we're gathering information about the property, getting all the details. We have the backup in-house information and the brochures to take a new agent and walk them through step by step what they need to gather at that meeting. But it's really a warming up session. You're finding out about the seller. You're asking them some good questions. What are the seller's needs? You're finding out perhaps some personal information about them and their family so that you can better get into their shoes and put together suggestions on behalf of that seller that are going to be applicable to them. It's not always a one-size-fits-all. There's going to be different strategies based on what the seller's needs happen to be. And we're going to be in a position here if we do our job the right way, that after we come away from that first meeting, the seller is going to have a working familiarity with us and a good feeling about who we are, and you're going to have that general conversation. When we do the second meeting with that seller, that's when we're getting really more into the nitty-gritty of the listing presentation itself and talking about the specifics of the company and also the specifics about their home and how the whole marketplace works. I don't really. I think that the key thing again is just information gathering when you have that first opportunity to meet with the seller and making sure that you connect with them and have some kind of a relationship that's built. The relationship ultimately goes to the experience of the agent and the trust that the seller feels. If they feel that there's definitely this is someone that they can trust, this is someone that they can rely on, this is someone that can get the job for them, then you're halfway home at that point. If you have never been able to have that connection or they don't feel that trust level, then the scrutiny in the later meetings that you might have with them will be much more significant because they're always going to be at that point not completely, they will not have been completely bought in to the system, and therefore they're going to be questioning more items. And some people are just generally inquisitive and they're very much more hands-on, and other individuals are not. They're going to rely a lot more just on the professionalism of the individual broker that's there. So those are things you just have to roll with on a case-by-case basis. Hard to predict in advance. If you're completely prepared and you have your toolbox completely filled with all the things that you need under given circumstances, then you'll be better prepared to answer the seller's questions and eventually get the listing and eventually handle hopefully a successful transaction for them and for our company.
I think being prepared is the key word there, because you never know what direction it's going to go, because you're always dealing with different people. Fortunately or unfortunately, you're dealing with human beings in this business, right? So you kind of got to be light on your feet.
Yeah.
I've noticed.
Yeah, completely agree on that. And again, one of the things we always talk about is that every single, although I've been involved in my career with thousands of transactions, every transaction has its own individual twist and has its own uniqueness. And why is that the case? The reason is because we're dealing with a unique seller that has their own relationships and their own level of expertise. We're dealing with an unknown buyer. We're dealing with two brokers that'll be involved in the transaction that are coming from potentially different companies, perhaps different cultures within the companies themselves, two different attorneys in the transaction. a lender that's an unknown at that point, and an inspector that's brought into the mix along the way, and several others along the way. So in any given transaction, there's 8, 10, 12, or more variables that can come into play, and each one of those can take a transaction in a different direction. And again, your ability as a well-trained agent and knowledgeable agent to be able to make sure that you can steer through and navigate that treacherous terrain is going to be your worth in the business to the seller. And that's why, in our opinion, my opinion, we deserve the fee that we charge. Many companies are in a position that they have a fee structure that I don't feel supports the ability to go deep and to be well trained and to do all the other things that you need to invest in a transaction in a seller to really get the highest yield on it. And ultimately, you get what you pay for, is the old saying. And I truly believe that individuals that are going to be quality individuals by their destiny, by their experience level, are going to be worth every penny that's paid in the transaction to be able to make sure that they come to a successful conclusion and get the deal done.
You think it's fair to say that all sellers, they're very different people, usually they want different types of value, right? So if you come in with the exact same presentation every single time, you think that's going to be something that makes you successful, or something that actually could hurt you and left you? Or do you think the greater skill or an additional skill would be to be able to recognize that and remain light on your feet and then offer the right types of value in real time to each person?
Absolutely. You want to have you want the seller to have a general idea of what you're going to be doing,
right.
And those would be your core points, so that they have an idea as to how the transaction is going to move forward on it, with hitting key elements in every presentation. However, the twists are definitely going to be there on every transaction. So some sellers may be completely focused in on, well, how am I going to get rid of my furniture that's in the house? Others may be focused on price. Some may say, well, I've got to get out of town. I need a referral to another broker, or I need someone that's going to assist me to accomplish this. And again, that's where we go back to that toolbox scenario. If you have enough in your kit there to be able to reach down and then have a solution for the questions that the seller may have, they're going to be different questions all the time. Then you'll be in a much better stead to be able to move forward. And the way that we work our system here, as you know, with our Partner Up program, if we have an agent that's one of our newer agents and they're in the mix and talking to the seller, they're only one phone call away from their partner up that can provide them with a lot more experience. Our partner ups would be our individuals that have a good amount of real estate experience, have handled literally hundreds of transactions themselves, and can provide that good information. And then ultimately, as you're aware, with my system put in place here, I'm the ultimate, the buck stops here. Harry Truman, quote from the election in 1948. Harry said, "The buck stops here," and as the owner of the company, the buck does stop with me. So I always try to be available to the individual agents there and be around to answer phone calls that they might have, and not be in a position that we prejudge what's going to go on just because we've done it hundreds and thousands of times. Because to that individual agent and to that individual seller, this is a fresh question. It's an important question. And just as you would have, say, an attorney providing professional inputs or their doctor providing them with health inputs, here as their real estate broker, the statistics show that the real estate transaction for most individuals is one of the largest transactional things that they'll do financially in their life. And they obviously need to have that care and attention to be given to them, not only by the broker, but also by the support staff within our company. So hopefully that gives you kind of a good feel, for the system and how that would work.
Yeah, I think you said something interesting question, which is, what do you do, especially when you're brand new, you may not know exactly what to do in every situation. What do you do when you get stuck, or what do you do when they ask you a question that you really don't know the answer to, just maybe because of lack of experience?
Well, I think that's where you have the lifeline, which is from the TV show. So you always have that lifeline out there, and we don't put a limitation on the lifeline. So the lifeline's out there. You can get more than one call along the way, and ultimately the way that we handle it is that if someone's working with their partner up, they would go to that individual because there's never an absolute. There's only recommended ways, and individuals will then share with the agent what the best solution might be at that point. But as I mentioned before, I'm the ultimate backup there to give my opinion. But again, it is my opinion. Just my opinion only does not guarantee success, as we've talked about before. Just because a brokerage company has a high percentage of success, there's always going to be that unique situation, which is going to be a special challenge. But our job is to try to cut the percentages down against challenges, and to try to improve the seller's stake or the buyer's stake in the transaction itself.
Okay, I think we went pretty deep in that one.
Good. Hopefully that's going to give some good answers there. And as I've stated again, if any of our agents are out there, just feel free to call me with specifics. If you're working your way through an individual transaction, we'll always give you the best advice that we have available, or the best place to get the answer that you want. And sometimes it's going to be to go to the attorney on it and to get the attorney's opinion on a transaction along the way. We're really about seller choice, and we're really about letting the seller make transactional decisions, but the sellers are hiring us to try to give them the best potential information that we have available to help them make decisions. But we're not making decisions for sellers. We're just putting sellers or buyers in a position that they know what their options are in the market, and then ultimately it's going to be their call on on how they want to move forward. And that's usually on the financial ends of the transaction itself. And we can give recommendations, but ultimately our sellers or our buyers are the ones that are going to hopefully get the benefit of our experience and advice along the way to be able to bring it home.
Yeah, perfect. Well, those are all the questions that I have this time, so looks like we're done.
Sounds great. Thanks, Gino, and thanks again to our listeners for joining us today on Ask the Managing Broker, and have a great day.